Good morning from Baja California, sir, Mexico. We are sitting on a beach between the two Cabos at the bottom of the peninsula. It is a beautiful day out here, but there are some events going on in the world that are very serious, and we're here to talk to you about them.
You're probably wondering why we aren't talking to you from that gorgeous beach out there, but it is very bright this morning and quite breezy. We'd be squinting at you and you wouldn't be able to hear us. So we're gonna overlay some B-roll while we talk to you from the camper. We came into town yesterday to get some cell phone service, do some work, have access to the internet, and we thought while we're here that we would talk about the coronavirus with you. It's a topic that has really taken the world by storm, something to pay attention to, and we thought it was time to discuss what it means for travelers.
Well, before we get started, we'd like to thank all of you for your concerns and well wishes. And just thinking of us, it really means a lot, and we are good, we are safe, we are happy, we are comfortable with our location.
Very much so. That's not to say that we aren't taking the situation really seriously and monitoring it. It seems to have evolved pretty significantly in the last few days, so we're definitely paying attention.
And this video is actually being filmed on March 12th, 2020. I think that's worth sharing, and any medical stuff that you hear from us will be coming from Rebecca, because she, before our traveling careers, was a physician assistant, which pretty much means a master's in medicine.
I think something that's on everybody's mind is, why should I be concerned about the coronavirus? And why are the health officials so concerned? And when you look back at history and you compare also to the influenza bug that goes around every winter that has less than a 1% mortality rate, the coronavirus has more of like anywhere between 2 and 7% mortality rate globally right now. Compare that to the Spanish flu back in 1918, which had 3% mortality rate. And we are talking about a bug that took out a third of the population in 1918 to 1920. A couple of really important things to think about with this outbreak, and I don't think if you're watching TV that you're too in the dark about this, but one is, how do you get infected? And two, what does that mean in terms of risk factors for having a poor outcome? And that's a really nice way in the medical world of saying you die or expire from it. So
not everybody has the same risk.
No, they don't. So the first off is, like I mentioned earlier, this is spread by droplet from what they can tell so far. So someone coughs on you, or they cough on a surface that you then touch, and then you get the virus into one of your many orifices by touching your face. There's a lot of question about incubation period, but people are contagious while they are still asymptomatic, and that's where we're having the biggest problem. Secondly, risk factor. Typically what they're seeing is the older you are and the more health problems you have, the more likely you are to have a poor outcome from this infection. However, Italy is a perfect example of perfectly healthy 40-year-olds succumbing to it. So it's not something to be taken lightly. There's a lot of jokes going around and a lot about the toilet paper and all of that. But if we can take this seriously for a few weeks, we can make a big difference in what happens in the long term. And I think as we see what's happening in Europe, it lends itself to meaning that we should take this a lot more seriously than probably most of us were, including myself, even a few weeks ago. A couple of things that we always factor into our decision making when we have events of this nature is, number one, is the media spinning it out of control. And number two, do we feel like we're being told everything about the situation? Because let's be honest, the media can get pretty wild about things. If it bleeds, it leads. And it's not uncommon for us not to find things out until after the fact. And I think there's definitely some of that happening in this situation. But given what we've started reading in recent days out of Europe, I think it's definitely something to pay attention to and to factor into your decision making in the short term.
So what's the situation like down here in Mexico, specifically Baja California? Well, like Beck mentioned, we came into town yesterday and we hit a grocery store because we needed to restock on supplies. There was not a shortage of toilet paper. There was not a shortage of anything. Rice, beans, diapers, all of those goods that are, we'll call them disposable, were in stock. We have not seen anybody that is a local wearing a face mask. We did see one lady. She was leaving a campground. They were American tourists, and she had a face mask on, and she wasn't even wearing it right. Nope. Lo and behold, it wasn't even covering her nose.
Nope.
But all in all, we're not exactly sure what's happening up north in the States, but it is status quo, normal life down here in Baja.
So Ben, do you feel safe down here in Baja?
I feel very safe. Always have, and probably always will.
I think we both do. It's a place where we can get away from the population centers, out into the rural areas. We knew when we came down here that there was an outbreak, but the reality is that coming down here for a few weeks wasn't going to change that. And we have what we need while we're here. So.
And I also think it's important to live your life and live your life to the fullest. A question we've been asked quite often is, or we hear chatter about, what if they close the border?
Yeah. Well, and it's already happening, and you can see it with what happened yesterday where they closed flights into the United States from Europe. And it's exactly what we predicted. They're closing the borders to foreign nationals. U.S. citizens are still able to come home and typically are just going through a screening process, and in the event that they are sick, being quarantined. The same thing is going to happen down here. If they happen to close the southern border, we'll have to go through a screening process. And if we are sick, we would have to be quarantined. But otherwise, they're going to let us come home.
I will go as far as to boldly say, no offense, I would rather be down here in remote rural sections where there's places that don't have international airports than in population centers. I just have to put that out there. I think there is a certain level of safety with remoteness.
Well, it also follows what we need to be doing anyway, which is social distancing. So we're kind of naturally doing that.
I think we've naturally done that since we moved to Alaska about 12 years ago.
We tend to socially distance ourselves, don't we?
Well, this is obviously going to have an impact on tourism and travel throughout the industry and the world.
Definitely. And I think the thing to keep in mind is that it looks like it'll probably have to be a short-term issue. Probably by the summer, from what the reports are, things can get back to normal. But in the meantime, it probably wouldn't hurt to exercise some extreme caution. And not just for yourself, but for the people that you love. Because maybe you're not high risk, but maybe somebody near you is. And also, they are seeing people who are younger without health problems not doing so well. So it's worth taking precautions. Doesn't mean you gotta panic. But for a few weeks, we can change our habits and make a huge difference in how things turn out with this.
And on a personal note, there is some way that this could affect us because we have a bed and breakfast in Alaska, which has a short 3-month tourist season. And I'm just going to be honest with you, it's income for our household. So yeah, this will have ramifications across the board.
And ideally we get done with it really quickly so that life can go on and we're not dealing with it long term.
We also thought it'd be helpful to share some general tips. And these tips are good whether there's an outbreak going on or not. But tip number 1, wash those hands and wash them often. Simple soap and water. Do the whole happy birthday to you twice, right?
Twice.
That's what they taught in medical school. Do that twice and you should be in the clear.
The other thing to do, and I'm not normally a proponent of hand sanitizer, but in this instance, carry hand sanitizer with you that has an alcohol base of at least 60%. It's an alternative to use when you can't wash your hands and will help prevent the spread as well.
This next tip is something we do just whether we know it or not, and that is touching your face all the time. These are orifices where viruses and bugs can get into your system. So just be cognizant, wash those hands, but also don't touch the face.
The other thing to do is to keep the surfaces around you clean. This virus is spread by droplets, so that means someone coughs. They're called fomites, and they stay. And we're not exactly sure how long the virus can live on these inanimate surfaces. So it doesn't hurt to clean the countertops extra at home. If you go on an airplane, wipe things down around you. Stay 6 feet away from people. That's what they're saying is the distance that you need to be, not to get something if someone goes on you.
So we see pictures and videos all over the web of people wearing these face masks. Well, what's the deal? And just give us the lowdown.
Sure. So masks, really, you don't need to be stocking up on them. All that's happening is that then healthcare workers aren't going to have enough to be able to wear in hospitals and clinics. If you are immunocompromised, this is an exception to the rule, and you should talk to your doctor about wearing masks when you're out in public. But the reality is the surgical masks that are just the simple masks you see a lot of people wearing, they're great if you are sick. And so maybe keep a few of them on hand in case you have to go out while you're quarantining yourself. But in order to prevent yourself from getting sick from other people, you need one of the big fancy N95 masks that require proper fitting. The other thing they're finding is people who do wear masks in an effort to prevent infection actually touch their face a whole lot more and are increasing their risk of infection in that sense. So
it's a double-edged sword. There's no winning.
There isn't. Most people are recommending that face mask wearing isn't something that's going to be super helpful to you unless you're immunocompromised, and that we would do best to allow the hospitals and clinics to stock up their supply instead of making a run on them for personal use.
Well, there's a new trending phrase out there called social distancing, or even maybe social isolation.
That's right. And this is something that, I was kind of like, a couple weeks ago, or even a week ago, or even a few days ago. But what we're seeing in Europe is how much, compared to China, is how much a difference it can make if we, just for a really short period of time, go along with what the countries are trying to do with the lockdowns, the closures of schools, encouraging people to stay home from work. If you can socially distance yourself from people, it can mean the difference between this thing going absolutely crazy like wildfire versus we deal with it for 2 or 3 weeks and then the ramifications for 2 or 3 months and then it's over and we don't have quite the number of sick people. The problem is if this does go crazy is not that whether or not you survive it or not, but how it impacts our healthcare system. Because if lots and lots and lots of people get sick, we're going to overrun the hospitals and they're going to have to start doing what they're doing in Italy, which is deciding who gets a vent and who doesn't. And I don't think any of us want to get to that point.
I'll use that sad ending to segue into maybe a positive spin on it. So what happens if, for example, you have a job at the school district and they close down the schools for 2 weeks? Well, if it was me, I'd get the heck out of Dodge and go camping. Social distancing, social isolation. Heck, camping is fun. We love it. Be out in nature. Just have to say, be away from people. Make the most of it. Let's use this as an opportunity to segue into some preventative things aside from washing your hands, because you touched about immune systems, and some very simple things can be used to boost our immune system.
Yeah, so one thing that we're seeing is vitamin C is helping a lot. Another thing is zinc. So you can use those in preventative form. I even read last night that they're actually using high doses of vitamin C in Italy, which is something that comes out of Eastern medicine, but what the Western world is actually adopting it because it's working. Yeah. So those are a couple of things that you can take. They're pretty benign, but they will potentially make your respiratory tract less hospitable for the virus.
Well, if you have a vacation or business trip in the near future, you have a tough personal decision to make. But if this sets your mind at ease, airplanes, they supposedly have HEPA filtration systems so that the virus will not spread through the passengers on the airplane, but you are still going to be at high risk walking through the airport and touching all those things that we touch with our hands. Well, our last tips have to do with the news, and take everything that the news says with a grain of salt, and know who they are. They are a business selling the news. They want you to stay on their network watching their commercials. So they're not always, trustworthy. Exactly. And then there's social media.
That's right. The articles on social media that we've seen going around, they're not all true.
Memes aren't true?
The reality is we should all, in order to help kind of prevent some panic here, be double checking the accuracy of the articles that we're seeing, in particular on Facebook, but just in general. Not everything written is accurate and real and true. And we can probably prevent a lot of hysteria and panic if we make sure that what we share with people is legitimate information.
Well, this next one is a little difficult, but who can you trust? If you can't trust the news, you can't trust social media, and who knows if we can trust the governments?
You're really sounding like a conspiracy theorist.
Well, why not? We're talking about a subject matter that is worldwide and could be, change the face of this earth.
Absolutely. But I think the WHO is a reasonable organization to get your information from.
Who? Not the band.
The World Health Organization is a safe place to get your information from. They understand what's going on at a global level, and so it's pretty accurate. I also think that you have to trust your instincts and know your risk factors and what's best for you and your family.
Well, it's time to wrap this video up, but I thought it'd be helpful to share some of the things that we are doing in our personal lives while we are down here in Baja with the outbreak that is happening right now.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing we're doing is keeping a level head. It's really hard not to totally freak out when you start reading all of the articles, and I don't think any of us are sure what to think at this point. And that's probably okay right now. But a level head, really critical.
I don't think it hurts to lay low, take things day by day. We know where our resources are coming from. We are conserving our resources. So we're going to try to run on the top half of our tank. Our vehicle, under the most optimal circumstances, has up to 900 miles of fuel range, which is a long distance, but we are just thinking ahead. And to some degree, I think that being this nomadic mobile lifestyle does lend itself well to that, because we do not use a lot of resources.
No, and we're in something that's very self-contained, and we take it with us.
And we have gone as far as to think, what if the bleep hits the fan? What do we do? Where do we go? Well, I know that water will kill you quicker than anything else. So you're going to need to be near water and food, and, well, there's an ocean full of fish out there, and there are wells here on Baja, so there is water. But I was thinking the San Quintin area would be quite nice because there is so much agriculture there. So we could be eating fish out of the ocean. There's agriculture, so that means there's water. And all those designer blackberries, blueberries, and strawberries that you see in the grocery stores, most of them come from San Quintin. So we just sit back, eat berries and fish, and just take life as it comes and make decisions day by day.
All right, well, having said all of that, I think that the best and most important thing we can all do is be carefully considerate for ourselves and for the loved ones around us. With that, we're going to close this video out. Thank you guys for your concern and for checking in on us. We hope you are well at home, and we are going to continue our journey. So if you aren't already subscribed, hit that button so you can see where we go next.